Horror fans, Fangoria Fright Fest presents 8 killer flicks. Full of thrills and chills, blood and guts, murder and mayhem. Fangoria Fright Fest.
Horror films in general are about the terror of entering adulthood because you think adulthood is actually evil.
He has written, directed, and produced some of the most disturbing movie images of all time. For over 3 decades, he has challenged, manipulated, and entertained his audiences. This is Wes Craven. In his words, told to Fangoria's Tony Timpone, this is his Screamography. A product of a strict Baptist upbringing, Craven had a difficult childhood, but one that shaped him into the icon he is today.
My father died when I was a kid, and I was raised by this other family during the day while my mother was working. And that guy, his name was Eddie Bilton, had an 8mm camera and was always taking 8mm films. And he also would rent them from the camera shops in those days. Used to rent little 8mm features like you know, Daredevils and all that stuff. So I was really fascinated by it, but I never thought of making them. And as you said, we were forbidden to see films, so with the exception of Walt Disney films. And I think it all just hit me at once after I got out of graduate school. I had seen To Kill a Mockingbird. I had actually snuck out of the college that I was going to that would have expelled me for going to the movies. It all sounds insane now, but and I thought the film was so fantastic. You know, it just was like, well, this can't be sinful. This is stupid, you know.
That forbidden trip to the theater made an impact on Craven, which would stay with him to this day.
I don't know. I always think that being raised the way I was raised gave me more, certainly gave me a great love of film because they were forbidden. And that always, you know, if you forbid anybody to do anything, then it's like that becomes really a great thing to do. But also, it made me literate, you know, rather than steeped in films. So I kind of have a very, I think, a deep story sense because I just read books up until the time I was in my mid-20s, you know. But you know, I'm sure I have a bit of rage in me, probably a good deal of it, just of what was taken from me. You know, by being raised in a group that said the world is sinful, you don't want to be part of it, sex is bad, you can't dance, you can't smoke. That kind of stuff, when you look back on it, you realize that that kind of fundamentalistic way of looking at the world really isolates people from life itself. I totally understand why fundamentalist Islamicists can do what they do, because, you know, it's crazy making, you know. It makes you feel like you're not where you actually are.
It took some time for Craven to figure out where he wanted to be.
After I got out of grad school, I was teaching, and they had an art house in the town, and it was right in the middle of the European New Wave. So, you know, all those films by Fellini and Buñuel and Truffaut, and, you know, that incredible outburst of fantastic creativity, you know. And I just fell in love with it. I just, I want to make films, you know. And I didn't really have an idea of what kind of films to make at all. I think I still had my head up my butt, you know, as far as what reality was or anything, because I'd come from this very kind of tight, narrow little background. So there was a lot of just taking big leaps of faith, you know, quitting my job, and even going to graduate school. I didn't have money to go to graduate school, but I just hitchhiked there and got a couple scholarships, you know, within 3 days. And so there's been about 4 or 5 key moments in my life where I've just kind of like, here we go, you know, because it just felt like nothing's going to happen if I'm still teaching up in upstate New York, and, you know, nothing's going to happen if I don't quit my job teaching, and, you know, and it worked out. So I think sort of passion and kind of, you know, bold moves like that are very, very important.
It was not only his risky moves that got him on his way, but the friendships he made that would turn out to have a great impact on his career.
I have a lucky break. There was a guy who was the big brother of a student of mine, Harry Chapin, who later went on to write Taxi and become a very famous kind of urban folk singer. But At that time, he was in film, and so through his brother, I got linked up with him, and he taught me just the basics of how to cut. So that was really invaluable. I wasn't making any money, but I learned how to basically edit on a flatbed. And then somebody in that facility where he was cutting fired their messenger, a 16-year-old kid, and asked Harry if he had a cousin or nephew or something, and I said, I'll do it. So that was my first job after college professor. Was a messenger for a post-production house. But you know, very quickly worked my way up. It was a very small company, and I was assistant manager in a year. And then I quit, and because I didn't want to become the businessman side, you know.
Craven's passion was to be the creative type. So yet again, he made another bold move to get him on his way.
So I started looking for jobs, and I was driving a cab in New York and thinking maybe I'd blown my career, my life, everything else, completely in debt, selling everything. And I got a job on a small film syncing up dailies and met this guy, Sean Cunningham. It turned out to be a lifelong friendship, and I worked for him, and I just kept moving up, kind of in the up the ladder because there was only Sean and one other guy. At the end of that particular film, Sean and I were friends, and he said, "I've got some guys with $90,000. They want to make a scary movie. You want to write a scary movie? If they like it, you can direct it." And that is how it happened. I knew nothing about making scary films. I don't think I had even seen a horror film. It was just one of those weird things where you look back on it and say, well, how the hell did that happen? You know, but it's just the way life goes sometimes.
And this is when Craven's life began to change, and he would soon realize all his bold moves were about to pay off.
So I always tell kids, just take any job you can to get in the door of a film, of a place where people are either working on movies in post or making movies, whatever, or even work for nothing, just because it's all about context. It's all about meeting people. And in that case, it was just meeting Sean Cunningham, the guy who was willing to say, we'll be partners on this. And you'd only known me for a year, and started off just hiring me, so.
Their first collaboration was 1972's infamous Last House on the Left.
Yeah, Bergman's Virgin Spring was, obviously the basis of The Last House on the Left. I always say that Virgin Spring was based on a medieval, they were called lays, not what they sound like, but they were, songs with stories. So it's a pretty ancient kind of metaphor for, getting the experience of life the hard way. Two girls on a pilgrimage, and one is murdered and one gets away for a while, kind of the wilder girl. And they're the shepherds who kill them, which happens kind of accidentally. They really rape them, and then they end up killing them almost out of shame or whatever it is. It's very unclear, all the moralities. And anyway, they take shelter in the parents' house of the girls they've just killed without even knowing it. And the parents in the middle of the night discover the bloody clothes of one of the girls and realize what's happened. And through the course of the night, prepare to kill these men, and then do kill them in the house. So I just thought that was a fantastic story.
A story that was considered one of the most disturbing movies of its time.
Well, I wasn't comfortable with with the viciousness in the real world. So I think doing a story with viciousness in it was like, this is what I'm talking about, So it was kind of a subversive thing in the sense of, rather than doing violence that's entertaining, we'll do violence that's appalling, and is happening to real people and being done by people who, even a few moments after they do it, are nauseated at what they've done themselves, and then try to clean up and, wash the blood away, but they can't, and they have nightmares about it, even as they're sleeping in the house of the parents of the girls they killed. So it's like all of this kind of, there are no black and whites here, it's all gray. The parents, respectable couple, but they plan really murder within a very short time, and carry it out. So it wasn't being comfortable with it. In fact, it was just the opposite. It was doing violence that you weren't comfortable with. I remember the scene where Phyllis dies, and they're stabbing her so many times they disembowel her without even realizing, and then stop, and that's kind of where they're just revolted by what they've done. We shot that in one morning, and there had been a sort of a tone on the set of as Sean used to say, laughing and scratching, which is often when you're making a horror film and doing the bloodiest stuff, everybody's kind of giggling because there's this sort of exuberance from playing in mud and doing the forbidden and everything else. But after that scene, we broke for lunch and nobody touched the food. Everybody just went off by themselves, including myself. And it was very interesting because it was just, for the first time we realized that we're doing stuff just is real in a strange way. It was just felt chillingly real and repulsive, and that's, you know, that's what it was.
Cunningham and Craven's next effort was to get Last House that elusive R rating. But with a story so violent and so intense, this would not be easy.
You know, it's funny because Sean and I delivered Last House to the boys in Boston, as we call them. We thought they might be mafia, but they were theater owners in Boston, and they had outdoor theaters, about 100 of them. And they're the guys that financed the film. And you know, we shipped it off, and we thought, well, it'll show up in Boston, we'll never hear from it again, and we'll go on with our lives. And then we got this call saying, you know, you won't fucking believe this. They're lined up around the block, and we've got riots, and somebody had a heart attack, and they're attacking the projection booth. And, you know, and it went on and caused this huge sensation. But we had no idea that that was going to happen. And then Sam Markoff heard about it and bought it and put it out nationally. So it was funny because it was something that we just kind of tossed off and thought none of our friends would see, and suddenly we were completely identified with it. And all of our friends started keeping their children away from us and stuff like that. It was funny. But you know, the censorship it's interesting because I didn't know anything. I didn't know the MPA existed, you know, when I made that film. And Sean knew it, and he said, we have to send it off now and get it censored. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, no, there's this place in California, we have to send a film in order for it to be released. I can't believe this. So we sent it off, and they, you know, we got this appalled letter back saying, you have to cut the entire ending, you have to cut this scene and that scene. And we started cutting it down and sending it back, and each time they said, you have to cut more and more and more. And finally, it was just to the point where we'd have to cut the whole film in half. And Sean said, basically, screw it. So he said, put it all back, put it all back. And we went across the street where we're having the blow up done and said, do you have you know, the negative for an R rating, you know, the blue screen with the R on it? And I said, yeah. So we'll put it on the front of ours. And that's how it got an R rating. I mean, it was totally illegal. We're past the statute of limitations now, and so it was put out as an R-rated film, but it was completely X-rated, really. And there was a point, I think about 2 weeks into its running, when there were so many riots and so many people cutting it up and, you know, trying to get at the projection booth and everything, that we did some cuts. I did it just by telephone because I was at that time in California, and Sean had somebody snip away some of the stuff that was out for 25 years until we finally, I had kept the stuff, and we put it back in for the uncut version. You know.
Craven was now making a name for himself in Hollywood, even if many had the wrong idea of him.
I don't know, you walk into an office and everybody goes, oh, you're Wes Craven, you know? I expected, and then it's like Charles Manson. Well, yeah, kinda. It's like everybody thinks that anybody that does this kind of film is really bent out of shape, is really weird, have horrible thoughts all the time. And so they would never ever think of using that person to do anything but that kind of horrible film. So yeah, after Last House, both Sean and I tried to do other kinds of things, and I wrote comedies and everything else, and which is stuff I had been writing all the way from junior high school. I had written much more comic material than anything else, and nobody wanted to know about it. But it was always, but if you want to do a horror film, we'll give you money. So we held out, both of us held out for about 4 years, and then we were broke, and another friend of mine, Peter Locke, said, I've got money if you want to do a scary film. So I wrote The Hills of Eyes, and I went off and did that, and Sean maxed out all of his credit cards and you know, wrote or had somebody write Friday the 13th for him, and went from being, you know, in debt to everybody to being, you know, a millionaire. So it's all those weird reversals that happen that you just can't predict. But I many times in my career, I've tried to get away from horror. It just keeps dragging me back. I suddenly realized horror films are great, and I have real talent for it, so stop complaining and just make really good ones.
Craven finally embraced his talent and continued to make films that made his fans face their fears.
Well, the inspiration for Hills Have Eyes was Peter Locke called me up, and he was always after me to write a film. He says, listen, I'm out here in Vegas. My wife at that time was a singer, dancer, comedian, Liz Torres. And she's playing Vegas, and you know, there's all this desert out there, and nobody cares where you go, so why don't you write something for the desert? Okay, fine. And I went to the New York Public Library and was going through their sociology division, just looking at crime books, and I found the story of the Shawnee Bean family from 1600s in Scotland. And it was a family that had gone wild, ran around naked, and attacked wayfarers, people going between Glasgow, I believe, and London, and pulling them off their horses and eating them and their horses. And so people would go on this particular route and just be vanished, you know.
One character from The Hills Have Eyes will forever stay with Craven.
Yeah, I certainly just years and years of people say, oh, who was that bald guy? You know that that was just a key stroke of luck and casting. Michael walked in to the office. We were a little tiny room off Sunset Boulevard, off a parking lot, and Peter and I just looked at each other and said, "Oh, you're hired. You know, you'll be Pluto." So yeah, because he was just no prosthetics. He was just scary looking, you know. And Michael, he says, I got 24 birth defects, so you know, I don't have any sweat glands. I don't have much hair. I don't have fingernails. You know, he had practically no body fat. He had a misshapen head, and we just put him out there, no makeup. It was, and he was just so scary. And he was the first one of them that you saw. I mean, everybody was just chilled, and that carried you through the rest of the film.
The film really put Craven and his crew to the test.
It was only my second, I think Peter's second. He had done some tiny film, and neither one of us knew diddly squat about shooting in a desert or even being west of the Mississippi. I mean, you know, we were both New Yorkers, basically. And the first time we went out location scouting with Bob Burns, our production designer, we rented a car in something like Barstow, and a nice air-conditioned car rental place. And got in the car, turned the air conditioning on, started following these Bureau of Land Management, you know, maps, cut off into the dirt roads. And then the guy said, you know, don't get off the main road, you know. People die out there all the time. We're like, oh yeah, sure. So we, you know, found these dirt roads and drove, and like 2 hours out in the middle, and we're like, I can't believe there's a place like this in the United States. There's nothing. You can see for miles, you know. And then we said, well, let's get out. So we stopped the car and, you know, turned off the engine and got out, and it was like stepping out into a furnace. It was just incredible. So we're like walking around, drinking all of our water and everything else, and finished the last water and got back in the car, and the car, which was now 200 degrees inside, wouldn't start. And we just looked at each other and said, we've done exactly what they told us not to do, and now we're gonna die, you know? So fortunately, after we let the car cool down and it started, but the whole thing was just kind of you know, learning what it was like to shoot there by just doing it. And it was up to 120 degrees during the day and down into the 40s at night, you know, and just, we were miserable all the time, you know, physically, but it was exhilarating to be doing the shooting. But, you know, there were rattlesnakes and there were scorpions and tarantulas and all that stuff. Like the tarantula scene, we just had, you know, it was a tarantula walking through the set. We just grabbed it, and I said, put it on his coat, you know, so when Lynn goes to get her husband's coat, there's the spider, and it was just like stuff we were discovering ourselves.
The heat of the desert could not compare to the stink of the Swamp Thing.
I got to see Adrienne Barbeau topless. I guess that was the high point. It was a very difficult shoot. We had a completion bond company that was on the set all the time, and were really nasty. So you would constantly be told to wrap it up, you know. So very little coverage, and the whole last 2 weeks was just, we shot basically masters, and they said, okay, move it on or we're shutting you down. So that was horrible. We were working in swamps that were full of alligators, and usually up to our bib, you know, coveralls, we had these waders, and there were just crocs or alligators going by like they were commuting, you know. But nothing happened. There were so many of us. I think the alligators were like, I wish they'd go away so I could have my swamp back. You know? But it was very uncomfortable. It was extremely hot and muggy, and there was some sort of plague of black caterpillars, so they were constantly falling out of trees and going down your neck and stinging you. And there were deer flies all the time, and there were a lot of water moccasins we had to watch out. So all that stuff was really, it was pretty damn difficult to shoot, actually.
Finally leaving the swamp, Craven moved to suburbia and began his greatest film achievement.
Yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street was inspired by, I think, 3 articles in the LA Times over a period of about a year and a half. The first one was kind of sketchy, and it was the story of a young man dying after having a severe nightmare, and they couldn't figure out how it happened medically. And then there was a second story about 9 months later, and the newspaper didn't seem to correlate it. They didn't seem to remember the other story. And then the third story, and the one that really made me feel that I have to write a script about this, was this kid. All these kids were Asian, all of them were Southeast Asia, all had come out of kind of war zones from Vietnam and Pol Pot, the killing fields. And their families had gone through location camps, and then it ended up in the United States. This kid was having nightmares, and he said, somebody's after me in my nightmare, and if I sleep, I know I'm going to die. And his father was a physician, and he said, I'll give you sleeping pills, you'll be all right. We've come through a horrible time, now we're in America, you're safe. The father started giving the kid sleeping pills, and the kid supposedly was taking them, but he stayed up, and he stayed up for something like 5 days. It was like an amazing, just keeping himself awake almost by putting matchsticks in his eyes. And then finally he fell asleep while the family was watching television, and they took him upstairs and put him in bed, and the parents later said that, we were all convinced that the crisis was over. And in the middle of the night they heard screaming and thrashing, and ran into his room, and he was like kicking and screaming, and they got to him, and he just fell dead, and he was dead. And there were 3 things that really just made me think this is a movie. One was they did an autopsy on him, and nothing was wrong. There was no physical reason for it. And the second was that the family said they found all the sleeping pills that supposedly he had taken hidden. So he had obviously put them in his mouth, and when Dad wasn't looking, it was right back out because he didn't want to sleep. And the third thing was this incredible thing. This kid had run an extension cord behind his bedroom curtains and into the closet, and he had a Mr. Coffee in there with black coffee. So he had a source of keeping awake even when he was in his room supposedly sleeping. It was just it was heart-rending, because this kid, he was right, He died as soon as he fell asleep.
Craven once said, horror films don't create fear, they release it. And Freddy released a lot of fear with his fans.
Freddy was based on, I think it was based on a man who scared me when I was a little kid. Again, my father was dead. There was always this sense that I had of it, like nobody's around to really protect us, because Dad's gone. And I just was lying in my bed. We're in a second-story apartment, and heard this guy sort of mumbling, grumbling, and shambling along. I went to the window, and it was this guy, kind of dressed like Freddy, dark jacket, the sort of brimmed hat that they wore in those days. And he stopped and somehow just looked straight up at me. And I was so scared, I just like jumped back, and I was back in the shadows waiting for the sound of him going away. And I waited, it seemed like I waited forever, and finally, well, he must have gone. And so I went back to the window, and he was there, and he just went, and then he started walking down the sidewalk, looking over his shoulder at me, like, and he went into our building. So I don't know who that guy was, but he became Freddy. My brother went down with a baseball bat, and the guy ran away. So I guess my big brother saved my life. Who knows? He might have just thought, I'll scare this kid for the hell of it, So that became the basis of Freddy, just sort of an adult that took delight in terrifying a child was the basis of it. And then the rest was actually a quite intellectual process of what will he wear? And I thought, like an overcoat would be good. And then I thought of the idea of a janitor. So because, I'd taught Greek mythology, and the descent into Hades was always going down and fire. And so made his job basically being in Hades, And the sweater, the striped sweater, was a Scientific American article on the 2 colors that are the most difficult for the human retina to see side by side. So that was those colors. And there were a lot of films being made with villains that had masks, but I wanted them to be able to talk, so I said instead of a hockey mask or whatever, I'll give them a mask of scar tissue, and that'll be the way the parents kill them. And the final thing with the claws was, you know, we went through the usual thing of, shall it be a hunting knife, shall it be, you know, a scythe, should it be, you know, all this crap. And so I said, well, no, go back to the most primal weapon you can think of. And I thought, well, it would be tooth and claw, you know, what men faced before they had real weapons. And then I thought, well, cave bears, you know, that claw that can come in and grab you. And then combining that with the human hand, you had kind of the elements of both the ancient and the new, you know, highly evolved, dexterous thing that makes humans so incredibly unique is our hands, you know. So putting those two things together just made something that was pretty powerful.
Freddy is still one of the most feared movie characters of all time.
It's funny, Freddy, originally I was thinking he should be a guy in his 70s. And we looked at a lot of, you know, older gentlemen, and they, you know, I think if you get to be 70, you're kind of like mellow. You know, you've seen it all, and you're just grateful to be alive, and life has a lot more kind of preciousness to it. And so, and then Robert Englund came in, and it was like, not this guy, you know, he's too young. And he just had such an enthusiasm for it. And I'd found that. And then we looked at a lot of big stuntmen too, and I found stuntmen were also very gentle people in general, that they were so in control of their body and physicality. They didn't have these issues, you know, that people that are a little bit more normal and, you know, were beat up as kids or whatever. And Robert Englund just had no hesitation to play something really evil. And I realized that that was what it took. It didn't take an old guy, it didn't take a big guy. It took somebody who was comfortable, you know, looking inside and saying, what would I be like if I was utterly evil? And a lot of people can't do that, you know. They don't want to go there, so they'll play it kind of bold, you know, kind of too big, or they'll kind of do it jokey. But, you know, Robert was willing, at least in the first one, to be serious, and that's what worked.
It works so well that Nightmare on Elm Street has grossed over $25 million to date.
Horror films in general are about the terror of entering adulthood, because you think adulthood is actually evil. Or at best incompetent, you know. And almost every horror film, the adults are either, you know, in league to kill you, or they are incompetent, like the sheriff, the bumbling cop, you know, the person that tells you, go to bed, when you know if you go to bed you're going to die. So, and it's about that transition into adulthood and leaving childhood behind. So, you know, that's an important thing for horror films, is that kind of the adults that, you know, in some way have sold their souls, you know, or are incompetent to deal with what you know. And I think as a child adult, if you can put yourself in that sort of 12 to 17, 18-year-old period, you're not sure you're going to be able to hack it as an adult. You don't want to be a child anymore, but you've got all those memories of vulnerability and the family struggles, and, you know, mom not being able to come with you in your dreams, all those sort of things. And then there's sex that's starting to become an issue, and you don't know what the hell all that's about and how you're going to do. And so there's a lot of real primal things that are going on in that 5-year, 6-year, you know, sort of pre and post-puberty teen period there that's really powerful. And there's no real guidelines that you can take from adults, and increasingly so, because each generation is so remarkably different from the previous ones. So, you know, adults are just kind of like, it's a period where you kind of have to kill the adults almost, you know. My theory is that when you do a horror film, it's almost like you construct a very complex character that has all sorts of things hanging off of him or her, you know, the past and what mom thought, and, you know, what their friends think you should do and everything else, and just one by one you kill them. And it sounds like you're just a butcher, but what really, if you look at it in a mystical sense, you're actually stripping away parts of a personality or persona that don't work. You know, the parental attitude that, oh, we'll just follow the rules, get rid of that. You know, you get rid of it until you end up with this core persona, the hero or the heroine, that knows exactly what's going on, still has goodness, but is able to kick ass and take names and stays awake, you know, and that's what it's all about. And I think that is the template that kids unconsciously are looking for. How do I get through the worst hell I can imagine, or the worst hell that I think the world might throw at me after watching the evening news. You know, what would I do if I was tortured? What would I do if somebody threatened to cut off my head? I mean, just open the New York Times. You know, it's there all the time. So I think kids are always wondering, like, how do I survive in this world of adults that seems to be quite maniacal and crazy and full of duplicity, and we're really nice people, and at the same time we're killing people, you know. That's pretty heady stuff for a kid to figure out.
After Nightmare on Elm Street, Craven created some more notable films to his credit. The Serpent and the Rainbow, The People Under the Stairs, and Shocker. But Shocker didn't cause too much of a jolt at the box office.
It's humbling that you know, when you do something really fantastic like, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street that goes on and on and on, and you say, okay, I'll just do another one, and it doesn't always happen. You know, for 100 reasons. I mean, sometimes it's casting, sometimes, in the case of that one, the guy who was in charge of special effects went crazy in the middle of the shoot. And he kept saying, the special effects are coming, they're coming. I'm going to give them to you all at once. And then he finally came to me in tears and said, I don't know what's happening, I can't think, and I haven't done any of them, and it doesn't work, and I'm so sorry, and he started sobbing, you know. And I sent my son to get the negative from him, and he didn't know where any of it was, and then we had like a 3-week search for negative, and we were finding it under benches in the labs with no, you know, no labeling. We found some in his trunk of his car. It was insane. So all that was going on while we were trying to make a movie. So yeah, it's like you never know what's going to happen in the course of any given film, you know, whether the gods are going to be with you or not. So a lot of the special effects of Horace Pinker going into, you know, the electrical field and so forth were severely compromised by the fact that one major part of the infrastructure of the filmmakers, it just fell apart. That's the way it is, you know. It's like it's a big crapshoot every time you make a movie, and you know, you never know what's going to happen. That's what makes it so much fun, though.
Then in 1995, Craven did the movie Vampire in Brooklyn with one of Hollywood's A-list stars. But Eddie Murphy had his own ideas for the film.
Yeah, it was, you know, I don't want to get in trouble with Eddie. He definitely, he didn't want to be really evil, which I think hampered it, because it really needed somebody who could be evil, but he kind of wanted to do a horror film, but he didn't want to be a bad guy. And he wanted to look kind of buff all the time, and you know, at that time he was just kind of into being a leading man. It was funny because the very next film he let all of it, you know, let his hair down completely, and you know, played the Clumps or whoever that family was, and was brilliant. So, but it was very difficult, and there were a lot of members of his family involved, and some talented, some not, and so we're fighting that all the time. And there were a lot of other things that I don't want to talk about, but there was just kind of personality and psychological stuff going on that didn't help. And the studio wanted us to do it in the back lot, so that was kind of limiting too. I thought it was a fun little film, and it was nice to get a chance to do comedy, but I think the script really hampered it, you know.
Then in 1996, Craven reinvented the teen horror genre with a huge commercial success of Scream.
You know, I read the opening of Scream, and it was just brutal, and I can't kill another poor girl, you know, geez. You know, you do have to go into a dark place in your mind when you do these films, you know. And it always seems like it's going to be a lot worse than it is, because actually when you do it, it's this, as I was saying earlier, it's a strange experience of quite often it being fun. Not that you're killing people, but you're dealing with these horrible things in a way that you're in control, and everybody gets very close on a horror set for some reason. So, you know, I thought it was, maybe I shouldn't go back there, and then at a certain point, I think there was a little kid at a convention, an appearance I made, and he says, you know, I swear he was like 14 years old, I've seen all your films, but Last House, you really kicked ass. You should kick ass again. And he walked off. And I thought of that kid, I thought, well, damn, you know, okay, I'll kick ass one more time. And that's literally how I decided to do it, thank God.
And he did it in a way that brought horror and humor brilliantly together.
I think horror films are, or at least the kind I make, are kind of black humor. You know, it's kind of making jokes about the graveyard and disease. And, I mean, all jokes are about things that we're profoundly uneasy with. You know, they're about religion and mother-in-laws and doctor telling you have 6 days to live, and race. You know, they're always about things that are really disturbing. They build up a lot of tension, and there's sudden release, explosive laughter. And a horror film is kind of the same timing, same release, only it's a scream. So I always felt like, you know, I used to write comedy for Liz Torres. You know, I wrote her comic act, so it's like, that was second nature to me. Making people laugh is much more second nature to me than making people scary, you know, afraid. It's like, I never thought I would be doing that, but the skills, I think, the skill set is very similar. So, no, I didn't find any difficulty doing it, and I must say it was an excellent script. And I also just found some really great actors, and especially Jamie Kennedy, who I could just kind of let go. You know, almost every scene we did one take where he just went, and I just kind of went with it, you know. But also Matthew Lillard was quite brilliant in improvisation. There was a famous moment when Nev has escaped, and she calls up, and he's totally bloody, bleeding to death because their stupid, you know, way of getting out of being suspected was completely backfiring, and they were bleeding to death. And he says, "Did you really, you know, did you really call the police?" And she said, "Yes." And he just says, "My mom and dad are going to kill me." And that was just his line, you know. And it's like trying not to laugh, you know. And so stuff like that just comes from, sometimes from actors. It just comes from everybody kind of like putting their best ideas into things.
But the studio heads did not think everyone was putting their best ideas to work.
The first week of shooting was the Drew Barrymore sequence. And I think it had been a while since I had directed, you know, and I'm always thinking, am I too much of an old fart? Can I not do this anymore? Who knows? You know, you never know. And so it was a week of shooting. We did a lot of Steadicam moves and everything else, but you never, you know, you think you're doing your thing, you think it's going to work, but you don't know. And on the Monday of the second week, I got a call from, let's say, the studio. And the studio person said, Bob Weinstein, pretty well known they did this. "Nobody's got to tell you except me. I looked at your dailies and they're just workmanlike at best. You're phoning it in. I'm not hiring you to phone it in." It's like, I just felt my blood run cold. You know, I was like, oh God, is it that bad? So I was like, you know, it's like Bob Shea turning around and saying, "Do we have a film here at all?" And what I should have thought of, but you know, no matter how many times you experience it, is that people that don't make movies, they can't look at dailies, you know. It's impossible for them to know what you have in your mind as far as how it's going to be cut together. So the second week of shooting was this frantic behind the scenes, you know, cutting it together by my brilliant editor, Patrick Lussier, and, you know, we had special music made, and sound effects, we did a whole mix, sent it to Bob at the end of the second week of shooting, total exhaustion, figuring I'm going to get fired. I get the call from Bob, and he says, "I saw your footage. It's brilliant. It's fucking brilliant. What do I know about looking at dailies? I'm taking it to Cannes. Thank you very much." And that's Bob. You know, it's, he can you know, totally make you nuts, or he can you know, support you and throw in tons of money to make it even better once he has faith in it. So you know, my experiences with that guy were all over the planet. I mean, from some of the worst experiences I've had to some of the best, and it just seems to be the way he makes movies. But it was pretty horrible, you know, end of the first week.
But when Weinstein was finally on board, he fought for this film.
The first Scream, for instance, you know, with two guys who are the murderers, and their ideas will stab each other, so we'll look like victims, and they'll never suspect us. And then they start bleeding to death, you know, because they're two jerks that don't really know what it is to get hurt. And they're covered with blood and talking, you know, for a 15-minute scene. The censors said, basically, you just have to remove it. I don't know. We don't know how you're going to make your story make sense, but you can't have it in your movie. And I wrote all sorts of, you know, this is a First Amendment issue. And finally, Bob Weinstein called him up and said, "It's a spoof. It's a spoof. We're just making fun of it all." I swear to God. The next day, we got an R. And we had to cut one little thing. There was a shot of Matthew Lillard's hand, and it was blood dripping off the end. And at that particular time, it was, you can't show flowing blood. So trim that like 10 frames, we got an R. So it's like, the whole censorship thing is so incredibly arbitrary and unpredictable. You can never cite precedent. You're lucky if you get the same group of people to look at the film twice.
The box office success of the first Scream led to a very successful trilogy, but not without some apprehension.
There was a sort of encroaching craziness on the way it was put into motion by the studio. The second one, no, the third one, Columbine happened just before we were to start work on it, and understandably, the Weinsteins called us up and said, "We're not sure we should do this," you know. And there was this horrible, you know, whole controversy all over again of, you know, horror films make kids do these things. And I mean, you know, 2 years later they find out the kids had horrible parents and all these other things, but people immediately point to horror films. So, Kevin's outline was, you know, was set in a high school, and the plot was that this girl and a group of friends were killing people, and she was the principal's daughter. And it was like, that's not going to happen. So I just said, you know, I think the third one should take her to Hollywood and just complete this sort of, you know, referential look at film itself. And so we put that in motion, but you know, it was already late, and so there was a lot of writing while we were shooting. Actually, on both the second and third. The second one was our first experience with the sort of threat of the internet and spoilers. I had never heard the term before. I think it was pretty much when they were emerging, but Kevin sent us 42 pages of a really brilliant opening for the second film, and the next night it was on the internet, you know, in format, the whole damn thing, which just killed us, you know, just killed us. So all you little spoilers out there. So we had to go back and, you know, reconceive the whole damn film as we were shooting, and fighting to make some alternate ending as good as the original ending was going to be. So, you know, suddenly the scripts were all numbered, and they had a purple stripe down the middle, so if you Xeroxed them, it came out black, and we changed a word in each script so we would know whose script it was and all that stuff, you know, just to try to safeguard ourselves against, you know, somebody publishing it on the internet. And I have to say I have to be very careful with what I say these days compared to what I used to say. I used to be able to say to somebody kind of in confidence, you know, this happened or that happened, but now it's like on the internet right away. And this kind of, I don't know, this kind of feeling like it's okay to just kind of try to get something out there that was told in confidence or something makes it really a pain in the ass, you know, to be frank or to, you know, talk in private about certain things. So you find yourself censoring yourself much more and being much more careful about what you say, because it's just got to end up on the internet. Not that this will, but you know what I mean, especially during press tours when you're talking to a lot of reporters and stuff.
Craven won't let anyone spoil his creative genius. He continues to make brutally honest horror films, which puts his audiences through an emotional wringer. His vision cannot be matched, and his passion remains his greatest inspiration.
Again, the business is like, it tests you, it really tests you, and you just have to say, I don't give a damn what happens. I've got to do my best to make one more film, and that's what I do. I'm just an animal that makes films, and maybe they won't let me do it after a while, but as long as I can, I'm going to keep making films.
The dog that has a flashback, what were you thinking?
You know, everybody says you can't do that, it's stupid, and I guess it was, but it's still the only dog flashback that I know of in cinema. We didn't have money to shoot enough to fill 90 minutes of film, so that would give me another 5 minutes of, you know, by showing that sequence from the first film. So I just thought, let's do it, screw it. You know? Sometimes that works, and sometimes people end up just thinking you're stupid for the next 30 years.